Hey everyone, Mark here. So this is kind of intro, I guess, and if this is the first video that you see. Over the years, sorry for the reflection. It's like the search for the Holy Grail to not have reflections on my glasses. Um, Over the years, I've met a lot of people, and they have asked me, Mark. They don't necessarily do that, but they do ask me, could you do a video channel and talk more about the things that when I met them we were discussing? A very interesting discussion. And I said, yes, I will do that. And it's taken me a very long time. If you're one of those people and I finally sent you a link to do this. Believe me, sorry, I'm moving my camera. I have tried to do this sooner. Um, So that's a long story that no one is interested in. But I have put a lot of work into how to do this. Once we get into it, I mean, those of you that met me know what these conversations are like. They're probably not like most conversations people have ever had in their lives. Um, so what are we talking about here? So there's no really easy way to sort of, it's kind of, I say, like a 50,000 piece jigsaw puzzle that's very complicated, and we're going to have to put the pieces together. That's, I say, it's what we call non-linear, the way that I think. So maybe let's start here. Maybe I haven't even said that to the people that I've met, but we'll start here. Is when I was about 7, 8, 9 years old, I've got to do something. Let me pause this and try and stop this reflection a little bit. Is that any better? It's a little bit better, right? When I was 7, 8, 9 years old, one of my earliest memories was thinking to myself, maybe I am an alien. I don't think I am an alien, so don't turn this off because you think I think I'm an alien. I mean, I might be, but that's not really the point of this. So, um, why did I think that? So, what my mind was beginning to understand around that age was that the way I perceive the world, but we could say broadly reality, this existence, everything, is very different, it seemed, to how everybody I'd met. And as I've gone through my life, I have confirmed that the way that I perceive things is very different to most people. Now, that's not to say that the way I perceive things is the truth, or correct, whatever word you want to choose there, but it is different. And I've looked around. I actually, interestingly, and I had a conversation, and I'm sorry, I forgot the girl's name. Um, it will come to me, a conversation. And well, we had this long conversation over many months, a group of younger people with me. And she said, "Oh, you're like this guy. I don't read anything. This is when I'm gonna come to." She said, like, I think it's The Alchemist, because what I told them was, well, there's something in me from a very young age that I didn't want to read other people's ideas about, so you could put all of philosophy. I didn't want to read philosophy. I didn't read any of it. Religions, spirituality, I something in me didn't want to know because I felt I it, so what I say to you up front, I tell people, is because something in me knew that the truth, whatever that means, we'll come to it, is in everyone. It's in you. It's in everybody. That it isn't something that's out there. It's something that's in here. And I'll say my bizarre to you at this point way. I came here with this knowing that this was the case. This was my purpose, if you like. It's not normal, I don't think, for 7, 8, 9 year olds to be thinking these kinds of thoughts. And as I go on through my life, you will see um, how unusual sort of. It couldn't possibly be, the idea that you sort of choose what you're doing. Like, I absolutely know I came here on a particular, what I call, journey, and this journey was to understand the nature of truth. What is truth? How do you know what's a fact, what isn't? What is the nature of truth? Was really the driving force from a very young age. And something in me knew that I didn't want to be influenced by other people's ideas. Now, later in my life, probably once I got to about 40, my late 40s, I did then look at other people's perceptions, we'll call them, about things like, so, you know, spirituality, religions, whatever. Um, and the closest would be, none of them really match my perception, this perception that is very different, which I'm going to go through a little bit in this video. But the closest would be someone called Lao Tzu, who's the father of Taoism. Not necessarily all the books written about Taoism, because that's other people's perceptions of Lao Tzu. But Lao Tzu, he said one particular thing that no one else that I have ever come across that shares my perception. He said, my words are so simple, but no one can understand them. Now, to understand, ironically, what Lao Tzu is saying there, which I only understand from the lifetime of this journey, which we're going to discuss towards the truth. You can't reach the truth, but towards the truth. What are we even talking about? Give me a chance. This is very slippery, difficult stuff to talk about. But I understand exactly what he meant. And so I know that person has taken has a very similar perception to me that's very different to most people, and has taken this same journey. We're going to talk about now. So what is this perception? Now, it's going to sound similar in some ways to some things you hear in religion, some things you hear in science, some things you hear in spirituality. But it is very different. So to understand those differences, remember, my words are so simple, but no one can understand them. Why? We need to get to a point where everybody understands that. I kind of came here understanding this intuitively. How can that? What do you mean you came here? What are you even saying? You crazy? Well, we'll discuss how you know you're crazy. Deep breath. So, what is this? What am I saying is different? Okay. Don't take everything I'm saying literally. This is point number one, because I said up front, words are very, so you'll hear me use this word polymorphic. What does it mean? Many meaning. What Lao Tzu is getting at there is that when people speak and they say things, your interpretation of what I am saying, and this is true of all human communication. I'm actually an expert in this. I've worked in an area of computing that related to this, so I actually worked on this. You could consider it AI. It's not AI, but it really would be. Like, I mean, if I wanted to go into that, I would be someone that could figure out how to create artificial intelligence to understand communication. What they're doing right now in AI won't work. But I don't want to do that, and we'll discuss why I don't. So there's a lot to discuss. So we kind of have an illusion going on in human communication. People say things, and other people perceive they understand it, but this is not really what is going on. Okay, so this is a rabbit hole. For the sake of this right now, it's not the truth, but for us to even be able to have a conversation, we could take something from electronics. It's called a signal to noise. You say when you send a signal, like a TV or a radio signal, there's a signal you want to send, and then there's noise that gets in there. So not all of the signal gets through. So we could say the same thing in two people communicating. There's some signal you want to transmit, and there's some noise that gets in there. Now, the thing about human communication is, for reasons we will eventually go right down the rabbit hole, and I can spend 5 hours explaining everything about the human brain, how it works, and how this all works. It's mostly noise and very little signal, but the brain tells you it's all signal and no noise. It's an illusion that the brain creates. Now, why it does that, whatever we can get into, we could argue it's an evolutionary advantage, and we can get into all this. But this is very, very important to understand, because you're listening to me and I'm speaking these words, and you need to be aware not to react, because people are very reactive to words. That maybe when I say certain things now that we're going to go into, that what you're interpreting is not the signal I'm trying to send, but some noise. So you have to give me a chance. Okay. So Where, so what am I? Let's go through some basic things about my perception that's very different to most people. Most people, you as a child, ever you become aware, and you're like, well, this is, this is reality. I'm sitting here, and I've got this life, and then you're listening to other people's ideas. You're what I call acquisition of knowledge, and maybe you're brought up in a religious family or an atheist family or a spiritual family, and you take that in and you kind of take that on. I call this the cultural download. This has to be true, as you wouldn't have cultures. If people didn't do that, then cultures wouldn't keep going. It's because if you're born in a Christian country, a lot of people take on Christianity, and if you're born in an Islamic country, a lot of people take on Islamic religion. And if you're born in China, where they're more atheists, they're mostly atheists. Most people kind of take that on, and it becomes part of your identity. Um, I came here even at a very young age. In fact, I'm sure my sister will remember this quite well. Like, religious people would come to the door, and even at 10, I was arguing with them, and they would literally walk away shaken and sort of saying, well, can't answer your questions, and I'm going to bring the head of the church round, was a common. It wasn't that I was trying to be argumentative. It was just something in me that knew none of these ideas were moving us towards the truth. I'm not attacking religion, so give me a chance. Um, Religions and spirituality and even atheism are not wrong, but they're not right. They're blurry pieces of this truth jigsaw we're trying to get to. And it takes some time to travel this road so we can all get on the same page. So I had an inbuilt perception right from very, very young, um, of this. So I was aware around that age that what most everyone you meet perceives that this is, we'll call it reality, that I am here, and this is that wasn't the case. But I didn't understand what I was experiencing, because you only understand what you experience because of other people. What do I mean? They say, and this is, I tried to come up with these thought experiments my whole life to try and explain this perception, because as most people don't really experience it, they don't know what. We have to find a way to communicate this. So let's say you were born on a planet, and no one on that planet has ever seen the color blue. I like blue, it's here. But you see blue, there wouldn't even be a word for blue, because no one else had ever seen it. There wouldn't be that color. So how would you even communicate that problem? What if no one had ever seen, if there was no sight? We were, an alien species that doesn't have sight, but you were born suddenly with vision and you could see. How would you communicate what you were perceiving? So what we say there is that there's no common frame of reference. That is that you can only communicate perception being this information that you're receiving, when somebody else has it. If they don't have it, then they just think you're nuts, basically. There's no real way to bridge that. I mean, if no one has ever seen the color blue and you do, well, we don't know what you're talking about, or you're seeing and we've never seen, we think you're crazy. And you may be crazy, and some people may say they perceive things that are indeed all in their head, or whatever. So how do we tell the difference between crazy and a perception that is real but other people don't have? That's a very good question. Spent most of my life thinking about this, but we can't answer that immediately here. But I became aware that I was definitely perceiving this differently. So it's difficult to know where to start. Let me pause the video and think where I want to go. Yeah, so people have a fear of death because they fear, they feel like this is their life and whatever. See, I never feared death because I knew that where we are is in fact the temporary place, and it's a place I'm essentially visiting temporarily, and that I am actually somewhere else. What the hell are you talking about? What do you mean you're somewhere else? Well, there's no real way to simply explain it yet, but I will. So for now, I didn't have this understanding, so I've tried to think of ways from things we do understand to try and explain it. Imagine that you right now you put on a virtual reality headset like Oculus Rift or something, and it was really amazing graphics, amazingly real, but then I injected you with a drug and you forgot that you were in a game. It would be as real to you as this is, and there would be no way for you to realize that, or would there, that you were in fact in a virtual reality. So I'm not saying that this is a virtual reality in that way, but that's sort of the closest we could get to understanding my perception at a very young age of what this is, that I was aware that this is essentially what's going on. It's just that most of people are not aware. Just some of us, it's not just me, by the way. So a lot of people I met and other people, and it's hard to say how many, but I see it's about 1 in 100 people have this type of perception. So if you're saying, Mark, that we're not really, we're in some place with headsets on, no, I'm not saying that. The technology and how this is working is probably 100,000 or a million years in advance, and it's beyond our comprehension. Just as if you went back to cavemen and showed them a TV screen, they would think that they were looking into another world, right? They wouldn't understand its electronics, whatever. I mean, how this is working is, we'll get into that. I can give you my understanding, and I can go into quite a lot of science. So I have a honors degree in sort of physics, electronic engineering, so I can go into all the science and tech and possible, but I will tell you up front that it is clearly way beyond our comprehension at this point. Um, but the key point is this. So if you perceive everything that we're here, that's inside this virtual reality, for the want of a better term, what I call the box. It's like a box that we're inside. We're inside this game. If you want to call it a game, it's not a game. That's the difference. It's not a game as such. And what's outside it, we have to give it something. So obviously, if you go and look in spirituality or um, religions, they would talk about your soul and your spirit. Yeah, well, what does that mean? We're using a word, but we don't really know what it means. It's like, well, when you die, you can find out. I don't need to die to find out, because I already have this perception. That's the point of this perception, is that some of us know, because we already we don't have the drug that makes us forget, and you can strengthen this connection and become more and more aware of what we are outside of the box. So what do I call this? So from this connection, and I spent my whole life working on strengthening it and trying to get what I call downloads and understanding. And I don't claim that I have 100%. No one. I don't think it's possible here in this box to have that, but I do strongly see, and from conducting experiments on myself and other people my whole life, know that I am way closer to the truth than what you read in spirituality or religions or even science, which all have their place. So I call what we really are outside is, I call it your symphony, your symphonic self. Why I call it that? Well, that's going to take some explanation. But for now, think of a music like vibration, like musical composition or light. They're both types of vibration. That what you are is sort of like a musical composition, a symphony of light and different types of vibration, and that you are essentially forever there. But you are also evolving there, and you evolve there by coming into this virtual reality, this experience. So I call this the box, where we are the experience domain. It's a place that your symphonic self comes to have experiences which you perceive to be this lifetime. Okay, so that's just some things off the bat. Now you could say that's very similar to religion. Like, well, isn't that? Well, the difference in religions, from what I see, is that they it's like it's you get this one life and then you die. So that's completely different. You don't. I mean, I know we've all been. Most of us have been through here many, many times. I don't know how many, and so once I go through a lot about this what I call the symphonic schooling or journey, which goes through three phases. I call the physical, the intellectual, and then making this connection to your symphonic self. It's very clear what these are to me, and it takes many, many, many lifetimes. So I think most people here, symphonic selves, have been through probably hundreds of times, and we probably have to go through many hundreds of times to evolve, we'll call it. So we are so connected to our symphonic self at this point, we don't need to come back. Is there anybody that's ever achieved that? Yeah, I mean, I'm not religious, but if I look around through history now, I would say most people you wouldn't even know, because their lives might have been quite unremarkable to other people for reasons that we need to discuss. The higher through this journey you get, I call it elevation. We'll talk about this idea of going up on a mountain and getting perspective. The closest would be like Lao Tzu would be one, and Jesus would be the other, that really stick out as being highly elevated, highly connected to symphonic selves, and closest to what we'll call the absolute truth. And they tried to tell people, but as we said about human communication, you can tell people, but it doesn't mean that they can really understand what you have to get close to where these people are to really understand what they're saying. So one of the things you hear me say is you only understand what you have actually experienced. And this is part of the problem. Someone can say the words I call talking the talk. Well, I believe in Jesus, and I believe in loving people and being non-judgmental and caring about everybody. You can say those words, but do you really understand it? Remember, why words are so simple, but no one can understand them. That's talking the talk. It's how you actually behave, how you actually feel inside. Are you just saying that because you're trying to fit in with your culture or your beliefs that you've been taught or you would like to be, but that's not how if you look at how people actually behave. So I call this walking the walk. The reason that Jesus, for me, or Lao Tzu are the two most elevated people I'm aware of, and there may be many, but I haven't tried to study everybody to see, but they stick out, is because of how they walk the walk, not the talk. It's how they live their lives, okay? So, for example, in Jesus' case, he's being persecuted and eventually tortured to death, but he doesn't throw anyone else under the bus. He doesn't try to save himself in that way. He doesn't put his survival above, and he sticks to what I call this elevation. We'll go into all these things, but I had a lot of religious people I know, and we've gone into this, and they say, well, why do you, if you're not religious, why do you pick Jesus? So that's why. It's clear to me he was, in my terms, someone extremely connected to his symphonic self, and therefore doesn't need to be back here anymore. Lucky him in some ways, okay, because it's much more challenging, a lot of what we go through in this process of trying to learn essentially about ourselves. So that's that's kind of the 101, how my perception was very different. What about, isn't that similar to some things in spirituality? I mean, I haven't read everything. I suppose the closest would be, and I don't know which spirituality, but it's certainly anything that discusses the idea of what we call the observer and the observed is on the right lines. So when you are here in the part of, well, we all have a duality. This means a two of ourselves. So we have the part of ourselves that's inside the box that is not aware of the part of ourselves that's outside it for most people. And then we have the part of ourselves that's always outside that is aware that we're in the box, but most people can't connect that, right? So, and I can explain this to you through some things that everybody has experienced. So even though most people are not aware of what I'm saying, and it sounds maybe crazy to some people, they actually experience this duality all the time. I'll give you an example. So, and I might have to draw some, I always joke with people, well, I need a whiteboard. So I managed to get some software, and we can, sorry, my chair is so damn squeaky. I need to oil it. We need to draw some diagrams that might kind of help with understanding this. But a really good example of this it's communicating this perception that's the challenge. Because if other people, as I went through, don't really, most people don't have it strongly, or maybe minor degree, you need something that they can understand. So let me give this example. If you are a parent and you have a child, you know you love your child, how you feel about that child. Or if you're a child, you love your parent, how you feel. Well, these days, a lot of younger people don't love their parents, but that's a different issue. But if you think of the feeling of loving somebody, okay, so Jesus was all about the love, right? Why was he going on about that? Well, because love, the reason he was because love is the most what we'll call elevated vibration. What do I mean an elevated vibration? Um, so let me give you this thought experiment. Let's say you can think of somebody you love, okay, or something or someone, and I say to you now, well, are you sure you sure you're experiencing love? Maybe you're delusional. Maybe you're insane, and you just imagine that you love this person. Can you prove it scientifically that within this box? So using intellect, using scientific method, can we prove that you actually love someone? So this is a thought experiment that I came up with. Um, I was quite young, probably in my teens, like 13, 14 through whatever. I was thinking an hour a day or more on the like what's going on in my head, what is thinking, what is going on, because I was just driven from a very young age on this path. It was a lot of it was going on in here, maybe not so much of it people were aware on the outside, but that's what was going on. Um, Highly what I call introspective intelligence, questioning and introspecting and perception shift, which are things that are not really widely recognized. That these people who have this perception, that's where they're stronger in generally. Um, but yes, can you prove that you love someone scientifically? Well, if we built, and so what is the thought experiment? I thought, well, if we constructed an AI, I think most people kind of, especially people who've studied electronics and computing, would know that it wouldn't feel, it wouldn't have love, it wouldn't have feeling of any kind. Um, as I used to joke, otherwise, when the telephone rings, you claim that it's feeling. I mean, where does feeling come from? Well, you could say, well, it's an electrical signal. Well, it's not. Electrical signals per se can't be feeling, as I say. Otherwise, or inanimate objects, bolts of lightning would be feeling. I mean, that's clearly not it. So that's not feeling. Well, okay, it's in the brain. It's the brain. That's where we feel. But then I spent 40 years studying the human brain. Um, there's no feeling. There's no way to explain feeling in the human brain. There isn't scientifically. Right? There's nothing there that's like, here's the feeling center or how that would actually work. I mean, we understand how the information is sent from, if you hit yourself now and the information is sent chemically and using electricity to a central processing unit, your biological computer, your brain. And I understand because I've studied it extensively in quantum physics. So basically, you've heard of neural networks, and that's the claim that the brain is a neural network. That turns out not to be correct. The brain is actually, we'll discuss, is a quantum level computer or information processing at a quantum level. And if you study some quantum physics, that means it's not even possible to actually observe it due to the observer effect, which we will get into. Therefore, we will never be able to observe consciousness. This is what I call the veil. Things that are hidden from us mysteriously. It's not mysterious, it's because if you could easily observe that with science, then you would see this, what I have this perception of very clearly. But there's a plan here. Remember, the plan was that most people aren't meant to be able to perceive it to a certain point. Not about the physical journey and the intellectual journey. To get to the point where you could see it, you've got to do that for yourself. The truth is in everybody, and that wouldn't be the case if you could perceive it using cause and effect observation, as we do in scientific method. Then one person would see it and said, okay, I've solved this. This is what's going on. We're in a box. This is outside. It's all over. Let's all get out of here. Turn the lights off. You see? So this is the genius of it. You can't solve it with intellect. Okay, then it takes a long intellectual journey that I took and to see this, but I'm really just cutting to the chase there. But that is what the reason for that, for the veil. Okay, things that are kind of hidden from us, so just very hard for our minds to. It's like that feeling when you try and imagine infinity, and your mind kind of goes like foggy, and you can't really hold on to that idea. You really try for a minute and then it goes away. We've all experienced, most people have experienced this, or if you've done very advanced math and you can solve it, but if you asked you a year later, you're like, I have no clue how I used to do that, right? It kind of drifts away, this fog or veil. And so there is a veil for most people between their intellect, which is something that this is biological intellect is your biological computer inside the box, and your symphonic self, which is outside, and there's this veil between them. All these things, I mean, I literally could make thousands of hours, and we'll go down rabbit holes and go into all. I'm just trying to give a basic idea of what I am saying is very different. So, can you prove? I'll come back to that observe thing is as well. It's not. All of these things like religions and spirituality, they've all got a foggy piece of the puzzle that's kind of not quite focused in. And so once you can make this connection stronger to outside the box, then you can focus it in and sort of see it more clearly, and you realize, well, they're not right, they're not wrong, they're just not accurate. We can get much more accurate about what's going on. And by the way, everything I'm saying here is going to be massively important, because the world is approaching what I call the Delta Dirac moment. It's a moment in time in which we're about to take one of two completely different paths. One is dominant inside the box in intellect, where we will lose, most people will permanently lose their capacity to ever connect to their symphonic selves, which would be a disaster and really the end of purpose for humanity. And the other path is we will realize what I'm saying from this perception that 1 in 100 of us or whatever have, and then everybody will develop this, and then humanity will move forward in a what we call a singularity, in a completely different direction, which I will describe. And I can describe these features and essentially see these features very clearly from this. So, but we're approaching this in the next 10, 15 years, and I think a lot of people almost have a gut feeling, have a sense of it, who are more, particularly who are slightly more connected. They definitely do have this. I've talked to young people. But there's so much we have to cover. Can you prove that you love someone scientifically? The answer is no. So where are these feelings? Where are feelings? I mean, how does it work? How do you actually feel? If we really knew the answer to that with intellect and science, then we really could construct an AI and give it feelings, right? It actually could feel, not what we call emulation. Emulation in computing is where we make something appear to have something. Like you'll see in the news, they'll float this idea, oh, we have this AI and you can talk to it, and it appears to be sort of like human communication, but it isn't, because fundamental to human communication are feelings, okay, and it can't have that. So, I mean, this is my area of expertise. So I will eventually can go into that in actual computing, like how you could design this as an AI and whatever. So I can tell you for absolute certain that we are never going to achieve human type intelligence with the current types of AI that are being developed. That's a bunch of BS that they are floating to get venture capital money and whatever. There's a reason that we are constructed of biological materials. It's because biological materials is what gives rise to feeling. And what's going to be realized probably has been realized within secret military and intelligence funded black sites, where they do all this secret virus stuff, but they do it all with all these other technologies out of the public domain, because they don't want to frighten people with what they're doing. But there's therefore very little oversight. But one of the things that they're looking at and probably discovered is that inanimate objects, or not, inorganic materials cannot feel or have this. They don't understand it's this connection, but they will say feeling, and feeling is integral to human type intelligence. So they're going to look to create a hybrid or cyber, so combinations of biological and electronic materials as an AI is the next step. And I wouldn't be surprised of out of sight if they have gone a long way towards that. Transhumanism is another term for this. So, um, but this is very, very important. The realization. So where are feeling? So this is where we need to come up with a drawing. So let me swap to a drawing. If feelings aren't happening inside the box, they're proof of what I'm telling you, that we are outside the box. Let me draw something and talk about it. We'll talk about music as well, which is also very brilliantly illustrative of proof, of really inductive reasoning proof of what I am saying. So let me just swap. Okay, bear with me because I've never used this tool, but it will do. Okay, so I talked about this veil. So I'm saying the real you is this symphony. I don't know how to represent a symphony. I'll just put some lines. It's lots of vibrations is what I'm trying to draw there. And this is you, as you perceive yourself here. And I'm going to put you in a box, as I'm calling it the box. And so most people can't see out. It's like if I put you inside a box, you can't see out of it. And I'm saying this perception I have and other people is that we can connect to this, and so we can see back. We can see, if "see" the wrong word, but perceive. Seeing is one type of perception, visual information. You've got hearing, you've got touch and taste, but this perception is different. It's not any of those things. It's a different perception, and I call that symphonic perception. It's from your symphonic self back, looking at yourself here, that I have and other people have. And obviously to anyone inside here that doesn't have it, that is insane, as I described in the opening video, of claiming that you can see when other people can't see. Fair enough. But let's see if we can examine this from inside the box. I've tried to think of ways with from in here, and I have an example of feeling. And music is another example. So let me use the music example. So take two people in the box now, and they both listen to the same piece of music. I see I can draw musical notes. All right, whatever it is, I don't know. Pick anything. Let's say it's a piece of Mozart, right? But one person listens to this piece of Mozart and they are moved to tears. They have these amazing feelings as they listen to this piece of music. The other person listens to it. Sorry, let me just check that my video is recording. I can't see that here. Well, I guess I'll just have to take it on faith that it is. The other person listens to it and they feel nothing. In fact, they think it's rubbish, as the English would say. And how the hell could you sit and listen to that boring music? Now, let's say, well, maybe you could argue that that's an intellect thing. Maybe that's because of education, like how they're brought up. So maybe if we make this person who thinks it's rubbish listen to it for years, they will eventually also be moved for it. Well, no, that isn't the case, as most people have experienced in their life. It doesn't matter how many times they listen to it, they still think it's rubbish. Well, so then is it something to do with the biological brain is different? You could argue that, but then you would have to find what it is. If it's not something that can be learned, then it can't be something in the, you could claim, the neural net. What physical attribute would it be of the brain? Be very, very, very hard to justify with what we know about the brain. That is the reason. I'll tell you the reason, because my symphonic perception knows exactly why. It's because over here, so there's two of you now, the person that thinks it's rubbish has no, what we call, resonance, whereas the person who thinks it's moving has resonance. What's resonance? So resonance is a property we can see in us inside our box. You ever seen an opera singer sing a note, very high note, and there's a glass of water, and then she, at a certain pitch, can shatter the note? There's a transfer of energy at a certain, so what we say is that everything is a vibration. It has a frequency, right? And every object, so like a glass of water, actually has its own frequencies. It's a little bit harder to explain without going into some science, but for the sake of this discussion, let's put it this way: the atoms is not actually correct. But for the sake of this, because I know everybody hasn't studied quantum physics or something, the atoms in the glass are essentially vibrating, okay, and they have a frequency they vibrate at. This is called the natural frequency. Every object inside the box has a natural frequency that is vibrating. When the singer matches that frequency, that she's singing the note against that natural frequency, this energy transfer happens, a connection, and this is called resonance. The same thing happens, this is how radio works. So your radio has some electronic components and something called a capacitor, an inductor, and this forms what we call a resonance circuit, where you can tune the frequency, and somewhere there's a transmitter sending out electromagnetic waves that match that, okay, that match that frequency. And at that point they match, this energy transfer can occur. As another example would be an earthquake. The bridge has a natural frequency. When an earthquake, it oscillates at the same as that bridge's natural frequency. The bridge starts to really has a high amplitude, we call it, of oscillation, and it breaks up. Okay, so these are examples of it. What I'm saying is that when you listen to music and you feel emotional, it's because your feelings are all over here. Feelings are happening here, and what's happening is you're experiencing a connection to your symphonic self. This is why I call it the symphonic self from music. In that moment, you're experiencing that connection, and that makes you feel emotional. So when you feel emotion, you are connecting to your symphonic self. It's just most people aren't aware that that is what is happening, and they perceive what is happening as oh, I'm feeling this here. As I went over, you can't be feeling it here. There's nothing here where that could be feeling it. The person that doesn't feel it, well, their symphonic self is different. Maybe they listen to rap or they listen to Queen, and they feel that emotion with that type of resonating with those frequencies. You see? I could take the example of color, the same thing. When you go outside and why is nature beautiful to us? Why do we look at an ocean or a blue sky? Why do we even feel anything? Right? Versus going look at some ugly building. Because we're resonating. Because over here, what you are, what we all are, is a composition of vibration, and vibration in this box can be expressed as colors and as music. Over here, without a doubt, we are much more complex or rich type of vibration that we can't actually understand yet over here. So other things that we feel, but that's the best that we can understand it. So when you're experiencing emotion from music or nature, you're actually tuning in, you're resonating with your real self. That's what you're actually beginning to understand, your true symphonic self, when you do that. So listening to music and finding music that moves you, or going out in nature, or finding colors or art or nature, or for me, animals as well, for a lot of us that are more tuned into this. I will talk about animals. These are all ways to help understand your symphonic self. And I'll bring in another metaphor here. Leonardo da Vinci, and in the Renaissance, all the great sculptors, let's say, they were interviewed by the mainstream media. I'm paraphrasing here because no one knows the exact, who said what, but they said, well, if you were given a rock, how is it that you turn this rock into some beautiful piece of art? And basically they said, well, I don't. The beauty is already in the rock. I just chisel away the outside to reveal it. So what I'm saying is that listening to music, trying to find what moves you, being out in nature and actually trying to experience it and connect to it, and animals also, trying to connect to animals, is a way of chiseling away your rock to understand your symphonic self. to reveal this connection. This is part of what I've done over my whole life experience. And I'm not saying it's something you can do. I don't think, the great artists sometimes probably took 10 years chiseling away. I mean, it's a lot of work and it takes time, but that's part of our purpose. It is, but there's three phases, as I said. The three phases, the physical, the intellectual. We'll come back to this. I'm going to show you a different version of this, and then this connection. But everybody, it doesn't matter if you're in the dominant, in the physical, or the intellectual. Everybody can start to strengthen this connection. Once you get to beyond the intellectual to this point, I call it the intellectual chasm, and cross it, then you will really strengthen it, and you'll be able to literally perceive back here. And this is what I've tried to do in my particular journey, and I've met other people. But again, we can't, like Lao Tzu said, I mean, you can't, everybody has to do this for themselves. There's no way to tell it with words. It's through experiences. This is the point. All right, let me try and come out of this. Apparently my software is not going to let me do that now. Let's see if I can. Okay, I'm getting there. My software is not great, so I wanted to swap to this and see how it relates. So, let me draw on this. Try and give you an idea of what I perceive. So, gosh, my writing is absolutely, actually my writing in real life is as bad as this, but it's very difficult on this. I'm trying to say physical, intellectual. So people always ask, well, what's the purpose of life? Well, this is the purpose of life. A lot of what I've gone over. So we're all on a journey up, trying to get to the top of this mountain. You could call the top of this mountain truth, or a fully evolved symphonic self. So coming here and having these experiences, in this outside the box, in your symphonic composition, this vibration, it's evolving from every experience you have. So it's trying to understand itself through these resonances. One of these resonances is physical. So everybody, when we start out, initially, it's like going to first grade school. We're dominant in the physical resonances, so we're obsessed with survival. So physical is mostly about survival. If you look at the world since the beginning of civilization till now, and even to this day, most people are dominant in survival resonance. They are obsessed with acquiring shelter and money and security. Okay. As you get towards the end of that, you're more concerned with your health, with your maintaining this physical vessel in this box. We will go into all these things. I'm just overviewing it. So you can tell you're kind of almost done with physicality when you're more concerned with. So early on, so you're going through this phase. At the beginning of it, I call it base energy or base resonance. Sorry, it's very hard to write with this tool, but the word is base. And as you get up here, you're elevated again. Within elevation, you're going up. So you can figure out where you are and what your purpose is, what your actual purpose is. So if you come in here in this particular life experience at base physical, then you should be hedonistic. You should be looking to acquire objects and shiny things and obsessing about food and sex, and these are all part of base energy resonance. Now as you get to the end of it, elevated within that, then you've had a lot of these experiences and you want to move on to other experiences. Now you're more interested in balance, we could call it, how to balance your health. So your health would be a good example of towards the end of this phase, how do I balance eating right with having a better body. You want to maintain the body, improve how your mind works, maybe, because you're going to become dominant in what we call the intellectual phase. So the same thing happens with intellect, and actually it's a lot clearer to me with intellect, because this was very dominant in my particular experience this time through. the first, there's actually three phases. So the first phase of intellect I call knowledge. I'm not even going to try and write this because it won't. But the first phase is knowledge acquisition. This is where you're resonated by. Remember, what gives you resonance is what kind of, like, you could call it motivation. So motivation, what motivates you, is a type of resonance. I should make this clear. So um, so back in physical, I should have said, like, if you're really into sports, so that's an example of physical resonance because you're into using your body and being resonant with your body. In your intellect, being, wanting to acquire knowledge would be a type of, so motivated to go to school, to read certain it doesn't have to be everything. I mean, obviously the detail of this is a massive, like, obviously there could be specific area. Maybe you're more interested in history or math or sciences. It's like in this particular lifetime, that's the intellectual resonance that you're pursuing. But it's knowledge acquisition. You listen to what other people have put in books or the internet, and you try and absorb that. As you elevate, so that's kind of base level. Again, if you look at the world right now, it's very dominant in it's we have all of these things going on all the time. There's no one thing. We'll come to this, what I call the collective symphonic self, but um, it's very dominant in hedonism, narcissism, which is kind of base energy, is very dominant, and then knowledge acquisition. The next phase is I call questioning knowledge, which is where you challenge what is in those books and what you're being taught in school and what you're being told, and you challenge and challenge it. And again, we're not talking about just, again, this is a type of resonance. So I came in here, as I said, even at 8, 9, 10 years old, I was questioning everything and questioning things that people told me I can't question, and you can't question that, and you can't ask that. It's not a choice. We can get into what is choice. We are all driven through our symphonic, where we are in the symphonic self, what it's trying to acquire, what experience it's trying to acquire. That's where your unique motivations and drive and interests really come from. Some of it comes from that, and some of it comes through learning from your culture and what's around you. So it's a combination of your cultural download and your symphonic self trying to express in the culture you're in. Obviously, say you're in an Iraqi Islamic culture and you want to question everything, you quickly learn you can't do that. So then that's suppressed, and then that has consequences, and those consequences are something that you are trying to learn. So every experience, as Lao Tzu would say, every experience is a learning experience, no matter whether you perceive it to be good or bad. But I'm getting sidetracked. I'm trying to keep this kind of 101. But there's much less people. I estimate, and it's hard to say, but 10% of people are resonating at their questioning. People think they're questioning, but mostly they are not, and we can discuss that. It's because their questioning is through cultural programming, and so in logic and reason, you would call this my brain is cutting out because this is what happens when you try and talk about this stuff for this long. You could say it's selection bias or a form of that, or confirmation bias. So there are sort of illusions of this through intellect, but true questioning, which is not about questioning other people, true questioning is about questioning self. So this is a very important thing that I am here to get across to people. So if you look at our world, intellectual questioning is challenging other people and judging, and therefore judging them. And everything in our world is like this, right? Is if everything is divided up into binary, because we'll discuss this is a feature of the biological computer as it perceives everything binary. And so it's like, well, you're a Republican or a Democrat or left or right, and then you attack them. True questioning, once you'll know you're in this phase, isn't about that. In fact, you've got very little interest in it. It's about questioning what you believe, what I call introspective questioning. How do I question? If I'm programmed by my culture, by my upbringing, how do I throw that off? How do I question that? Okay, so that's highly to the end of that questioning phase. That's you start with questioning other people, but the elevated version of that is all about questioning yourself. And that moves into the third phase of the intellectual journey. I came in, let's say, 7, 8, 9 there. And the next phase I call meta. So the meta phase is, God, cannot write with this. The meta phase is where your self-questioning leads you to question the very apparatus that you are using to question. I said at 12, 13, I was questioning, how is my mind working? What is thinking? How is it going? That led me to study then the biological computer, everything else. So that is meta. And eventually, and I can't draw it on here, but imagine there is a big chasm, like a big rift on this mountain that you can't cross. Okay, I call this the intellectual chasm. At the end of the meta phase that I reached at 27, remember it to the day. I used to meditate an hour a day, trying to observe, develop my what I call introspective intelligence. It took me 10 years, well now probably 7 years at that point, an hour a day, working on trying to not think so I could be aware of when I began to think, and like, where are thoughts coming from? What is the source of this thinking? We can discuss this. Something, if you want to get up the mountain, you have to do the work. No one can do it for you, and this is an example of the work that you have to do. If you want to cross the meta phase to get to the intellectual chasm, you have to do what I did. I don't think there's any way else around it. This is why monks in Shaolin temples do all this meditation. It's very similar. You're trying to separate your intellect from your connection outside of this symphonic self. They wouldn't put it like that, but they have an awareness of that they develop. They take kids from very young and then they make them do this type of meditation. This is, you can say you're doing mindfulness meditation. It's got nothing to do with this. This work is very specific that you would have to do, and it's very difficult, and it takes years and years and years to do this. There's no other way. But what happens is you reach this chasm where you become aware of that all of this is inside that box, and there's something outside the box. And so what I liken it to, what happened with me at this 27 to sort of 29, 30 is, and it's very hard to explain because what the work is, but all this work I've done, that to cross the chasm, to jump across it, imagine a 20-foot crossing. I've got a big rucksack on my back that is all of these journeys that got me here. It's like a rucksack full of a map and a compass and food, and it got me up the mountain, and it got me through this intellectual journey, all these phases. But it's heavy, and if I want to cross this 20-foot chasm, I have to take it off. I have to let go of everything that got me there. But I don't want to, because that's holding me inside the box, is keeping me in the same reality that other people are, what I call tethered. You're tethered like a climber has a pole into this mountain. This mountain here represents what most people perceive as reality. And if I let go of that, I'm essentially going to feel insane, because I'm going to be in this other symphonic perception that is so completely different that it's very hard for me to even exist in the same reality, this tethered reality. So I tell people, my experience of that is, and I think looking at people in history, someone like Van Gogh, is you have to go insane. You could call that insanity. You have to let go of, air quotes, your sanity, what's tethered. To cross that, you have to let it all go and to make the jump. But once you get through that, then you regain a sanity that is far more, air quotes, sane than the sanity we perceive in this box, because this tethered sanity is mostly an illusion that we'll discuss. So then you see the whole, you're up here now, so you're looking back down, you have much more perspective. You can see in all these directions. Whereas here, you're just kind of climbing and slogging up, and you just kind of seeing the next step in front of you. Now you can kind of see the whole mountain. And, I'm probably, I don't know, in terms of my journey, and it's not a race. Everybody has to do it, and there's no one can do it for you. You have to do all this work. It's You know, Jesus is probably up here waving down at me. I'm not there. Um, but that's where we're trying to get to, where, you know, I suppose in spirituality, you know, where Buddhists and whatever would say, where you can, they would say, you can, you know, no matter what experience, you can observe yourself, um, and stay balanced. I don't, my perception is different. Okay, so that's a whole topic. I see that the objective is not to be balanced, it's to be unbalanced and then rebalance yourself, and that is what we could call learning or resonance. But it don't mean much to people at this point, so but we'll come back to it. There's a fundamental difference. You shouldn't seek to be completely balanced because that limits your experiences. We're in a physical domain. You're meant to have physical experiences. So, you know, it's like you see in all these sort of mystical spiritual things, you know, that everyone rejects the idea of sex and things like that. But that is not the case, because that's another type of resonance. Love and sex is a resonance. Um, Food, everything. What you're looking to do is just to be able to experience things inside the box, observe yourself and learn from it in a maximal way, but not become unbalanced. So that's, you know, that's a really big topic that I can't do justice to right here. Um, Now the challenge is that once you cross the chasm, now your big challenge is existing inside the box, and that's been my problem. You know, I had chronic health from 11, nearly died when I was 40, bedridden for 2 or 3 years, and I gradually, you know, you could say I have lupus and autoimmune, all these things, these labels we could put on it. But what it really is the cost, the friction, as I call it, of having these perceptions inside the box. It's the price you pay. People's so-called mental health issues are all also prices you're going to pay at various stages in this journey. It's a completely different way of perceiving it. So, for example, depression is mostly not your neuro transmitter imbalances, as people are trying to say, and we don't even understand what's really just guessing there. It's just an expression of the price of that often you're not resonating. Your symphonic self is not being able to be expressed. Like I said, if you were in Islamic culture but you're in your highly questioning phase, well, you're up shit creek, aren't you? And so that has to express. It's still an experience that you need to have, but that's going to have a price, and the price could be depression. In our society, we see, you know, anxiety, ideation, all these things. Okay, so a lot of, I'm not saying all, but a lot of mental health is what I call the lion in the Arctic. If I take a lion, I put him up in the snow, he hates it because it's not an environment that suits a lion. He likes Africa and he likes the warmth. So when your environment doesn't fit, you develop issues. And now he's got a team of zoo psychologists diagnosing him with mental health issues and giving him drugs. So he's not even a lion anymore. He's a drugged out lion that makes them feel better about the lion that isn't even behaving like a lion. And this is what we try and do in our world. But the real issue is that the lion's true self, his symphonic self, isn't being able to be expressed. And this is what is giving rise to the massive rise in mental health issues, as we're calling them, in our world. And it can be physical. In my case, it more expressed physically. Once I crossed that chasm and processed this and understood it, what was really going on, it took me to about 45. I could kind of let that go, and then my health has improved dramatically. In fact, most doctors are astonished, and you know, when I do talk to them, which is rarely, because I don't need the help of pharmaceuticals and Western medicine, which is mostly fake junk science, which we can discuss using statistical methods that have no root in what we call causality, and mostly just paid for fake data. Um, so, I mean, I had to study the immune system for 15 years and acquire all this knowledge and try and work on myself. But a big part of it is an understanding of all of this. It's a mess, what I've drawn here, but hopefully you followed it. As I've gone through the video, right, I'm going to turn this back now if I can. I know I've talked pretty quickly, and, you know, I'm trying to cram stuff in there, but this, believe me, is really the most surface 101 that I can possibly give. I could go into massive detail about everything excuse me, I'm saying I've spent my entire life climbing up that mountain. And I say, if you think of, most people's perception, particularly in the physical or early intellectual, it's what I call one perspective, one view of the mountain. But as you go higher up, what happens is you've got to get up, you've got to find less clear routes. So you start going sideways and up and around, and you're turning over rocks, and you're gaining all these other perspectives. So we go from a binary type perspective to this multiple perspectives. That's what we try to develop. So we're developing these types of intelligence in a way that are not appreciated in the physical and intellectual, which mostly appreciates physical ability, survival ability, or logic and memory and academics. But to get to these higher elevations, you have to develop types of intelligence I'm describing here: resonances, introspective, challenging your own brain. There's meta thinking, what I call perception shift, being able to see multiple perspectives, and eventually tuning this resonance to your true self. You could call it your symphonic self. So you have to let go of all that. I mean, you have to let go of your ego. I used to think I was quite smart when I was young, and then by the time I've got up here, I realized I know literally nothing. And this is common to anyone that's sort of got elevated. That you realize the more you know, you realize the less you know. And we will cover these things, but the more you know in terms of this symphonic viewpoint of what's really going on. Okay. I don't know how this is. I always believe I'm going to keep this video short, and then I get talking. It's really impossible. I probably could talk for 100,000 hours to go down what we call the layers of abstraction, the detail, down a rabbit hole, you could say, of all this. I'm really just scraping the surface. So one of the, so people might ask me, well, what do you call your understanding of this? What do you call it? So I call it, and there's a part of this we need to discuss. I call it symphonic. From what I've gone over, calibrationism is what I'm going to try and teach people. It's about how to go through these phases to identify where you are, what then skills you need to work on in each phase, your purpose of where you are, and ultimately it's this calibration, so which I haven't discussed. So then briefly, and then I will end this. If you took scientific method, which I've spent my whole life studying scientific method, the method, I don't care so much about the product of the science. I mean, it's almost infinite, the amount of so-called knowledge, but a lot of that knowledge is questionable because we have to look at the method that produced it. That's my interest, because the scientific method is trying to get us closer to a type of truth I call repeatable, falsifiable, observable truth. So we will discuss that in a separate video because that is vast. That's what scientific method was meant to give us. It's being completely corrupted in our world, inside the box right now. It's being used against people as a form of authority, as almost a form of deity and divinity. But it isn't true scientific method. It's a horrible, abominative corruption of it by the powers that be because most people can't challenge it because they haven't extensively studied scientific method. But if you study it, a key point is what we call falsification, which is being able to challenge it. But let's just stick to this calibration. When you do an experiment, let's say you were taking the temperature of a liquid, you use a thermometer. But the first thing you should learn in proper scientific method is, how do you know the thermometer is accurate? Maybe it's not accurate. So this is called calibration. It's like when you go for a diagnostic test at the doctors, how do they calibrate that it's accurate? Well, turns out, believe me, that a lot of that testing is not calibrated correctly in virtually all, so it ends up being very subjective. So this is not what we call a hard science, unfortunately. So what came to me during my meta phase that I went over there is, well, how do we, so if this is a biological computer, it's trying to process and perceive things, I haven't really gone into how this computer works yet, but we'll talk about something called conceptual clustering, and very few people in the world, by the way, know about any of this, so it's very unfortunate. Everybody should be taught all this in school. This is what I would put forward as we'll discuss these two futures, is teaching everybody the manual to the mind, so everybody understands how all of this that I'm going through is actually working. But calibration, how do we calibrate the human mind? Well, we calibrate a thermometer by finding a known temperature. This is same with all calibration. We have to test it against a perfect version of whatever it is. But how are you going to calibrate the human mind? Because you would have to know that that biological brain was in perfect working order, and everything it perceived was perfect. But we don't have that. Essentially, you'd be defining God, right? If you wanted to try and put a definition on it, but we don't have that. So there's no way to know how. So the only way I'm telling you from having taken this journey is once you have crossed the chasm, then you can understand how to calibrate this. So this is why it's symphonic calibration, but it cannot be done through intellect. It cannot be done from inside the box, from everything that we currently understand as of science and reasoning. That will only take you so far, as I went through on that video. To actually calibrate it, you have to see from the outside how to do that calibration. And the calibration comes from what Jesus was trying to tell you, which is then you're going to focus on not on intellect, but on things like forgiveness and non-judgmentalism and I can't think of the words. My brain, so my brain's not very calibrated today because it's cutting out. But unconditional love, basically forgiving anybody, even your worst enemy, all these types of things. I mean, I'm just scratching the surface. I mean, go and look what Jesus said, and that's why I'm saying it's elevated. You don't. It's ironic because you see what religions have done throughout the world and all the wars and all the atrocities. But where did Jesus say about, if your enemy attacks, go over there and hack them down too and wreak vengeance? Now, that's not what the elevated stuff that he was saying, right? And yet that's the kind of, so it's the talking the talk versus walking the walk. It's what you walk that matters in terms of this elevation. So can you, in putting it in your terms, in your life, can you forgive people no matter what they've done? Can you love them no matter what? Can you help people no matter what the cost to yourself? But there's a balance there too that we need to discuss, because you have to love yourself too, and so you can't give everything of yourself that unbalances you. So these all the things that I have experienced and I see and understand. This is what Jesus is trying to say, but it all fell on deaf ears because the thing I didn't go over is I said I was going to stop. I'm always going to say I'm going to stop, but this is almost infinite. This will be, I promise, the last thing. Look at your body. Your body is made out of cells. Each cell is alive on its own. We can take it out, it's alive. That's like each of us here, or each of us symphonic selves. They're like leaves on a tree. Every leaf is unique, but it's part of a whole. Just like your cell is part of a whole body. So we could call that collection of symphonic cells or symphonic selves, the whole of it, we could call the collective symphony or a collective consciousness here. Since the beginning of civilization, that was, I said, everybody starts in the base physical, then you elevate the physical. You're actually working on the physical and the intellectual and this connection, symphonic connection, all the time, all at once. But we started out mostly in the base, right? So look at human history. It was wars and aggression, no forgiveness, vengeance. Eventually, we started to develop intellect for the last few thousand years. I mean, we've been around millions of years, right? So relatively recently, but mostly in the knowledge acquisition, very little of this introspective questioning or meta. We've virtually not got any of that in this world, and so no appreciation of it, right? Stop thinking your head in the clouds and go get back to the coal mine, right? Because that's the expression of that resonance right now is dominant. You're always, so part of that journey is eventually to throw that off and realize, well, obviously that's how most people are gonna feel. It's like if you have empathy, they're gonna say, oh, toughen up, because that's where they are in their journey. But that's what you're here to learn, is that if you give in to that, you will never develop empathy and you will never be able to get past that, right? It's hard to explain these things, but very shortly in this video, but we will go into each of these. You've got to be what you are meant to be, and if you give in to what the collective is, the collective stays static, doesn't grow. The point is that essentially the symphony is trying to evolve, and if you are expressing these higher elevated parts, meta thinking or empathy, that you need to do that, and if you give in and don't do that, you're just kind of being de-elevated and pulled back to your base nature. This is what's happening naturally in the world around us all the time right now. I call this conducting, like music. The base energy is kind of conducting even people who have more elevation back down the mountain. It's very hard to resist that, to not get pulled down. And this is the things that I am here to, my purpose, to express and talk about how to defend against that, how to not be conducted back down. It's all very, very difficult. That's why it takes as many lifetimes to learn these things. But the collective is now at this critical point, this two path. It's also trying to learn. It's also had many lifetimes. So civilization has risen and fallen, not in this reality as you would understand it, but that has happened. And so this is the many times through to reach this point of trying to understand its own choices, its own evolution, of this choice between a purely intellectual inside the box or connecting outside the box. What's really going on here, and I probably shouldn't get into it because this is a bit, really seems out there, but it is the highest, viewpoint I've got. This is what it is. So if spirituality says there's an observer observed, the observer is the symphonic self in a sense, is what they're saying. But actually there's a collective symphony observing each individual symphonic self, and then there's a overall, if you like, consciousness or symphony you could call God, essentially. So in a way, each cell, each symphonic self is a part of the collective consciousness you could call a God. That really what's happening here in the box is trying to evolve to become what it already is in this other place, in this symphonic place. We're trying God. I'm obviously these words and detail. Remember, I said right at the beginning, are not exactly what I'm saying, but I'm trying to give a 101 because everyone has asked me these questions. In a way, God is trying to understand how it evolved through with each of us being a cell of God and going through that evolution. That's really what's happening. This domain is evolving to become God, ultimately. That is really, there's so much to talk about there. In a sense, this is a part of biological simulation, but it's not. It's part of virtual reality, but it isn't. But that is the essence of what the overall purpose of this domain is. But we are at this critical point where typically the collective, it chooses the left path of intellect and ego and these base energies over the listening to the few cells that are resonating at this meta or symphonic frequencies, and so it destroys itself effectively by that, which we will discuss. We'll talk about the filter event and the Fermi paradox, and the upcoming events in your life, like things that maybe you see around you now a little bit last few years, but they've actually been going on a very long time. Who the powers that be are, and what they're up to, and what they're going to do. It's all very clear, by the way. I mean, I can tell you exactly what these two paths are, and we can go through it, but it doesn't really matter. You just got to focus on your own personal journey and personal elevation and experiences, ultimately. Okay, I really will stop this here. Maybe I'll pick up that one in the next video. Okay, take care, everyone.